Hi, this is Mike Peterson from Challenge Island, Oakland County East, back with another one of our Steamtastic Fridays. Today we're going to continue our series from the Steam Railroading Institute from Owosso, Michigan. If you saw our video last week, we talked about the science of real steam, in other words, steam engines. So if you missed that one, be sure to look up and check that one out. But today we're going to focus on the T of steam, which is the technology. So today we're going to try and learn more about all the history of all the cool technology and everything that went into creating the steam engines and everything that they could do. So let's go listen in. All right, for today's episode from our STEAM series, we'll be talking about the T, or the technology, that went into these amazing machines, to these old-time steam engines. So for this, we have Dean Pyers with us, who's a volunteer with the Steam Railroading Institute, and he's really familiar with some of the technology that's been put into these over the years to really make them work well. So we'll let Dean tell us more about that.
Thanks, Mike, and good to see you again. Mike and I worked together back at General Motors for a number of years. So the locomotive behind me today, Paramarquette 1225, was built by the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio. It was delivered to the railroad in 1941, November of 1941. Lima Locomotive was probably the smallest of the big three locomotive builders back in the day, Baldwin and American Locomotive being bigger, but Lima was pretty inventive and pretty creative with how they approached getting more technology and more power out of the same amount of coal and water that was being used in the locomotives. This locomotive ran in the state of Michigan for about 10 years on the Paramarquette Railway. Their main lines were Chicago to Detroit, Saginaw to Toledo, and other branch lines all across the state. And it moved fast freight. It moved freight at 60 miles an hour through the World War II years and into 1951. It was retired and donated to Michigan State University as for their engineering department and as a museum display. And in 1969, a group of students got together and started restoring the locomotive. And since then, that group has branched out and become an independent group on their own that operate the 1225 to this day. Steam railroading here at the Steam Railroading Institute in Owosso. Some of the features, when you think about how these engines were designed 75 years ago, the engineers that were doing all the work didn't have computer power, they didn't have electronic calculating devices. They had slide rules, they had manual calculations, they had blueprints that were hand-drawn, not with computer-aided drawing, but they were doing the drawing by hand on drafting tables, big 8 to 10 foot long tables where they took pen to paper and drew the parts that they were going to be building. We have examples from the old order files where you can see some of the calculations done by hand, and little red check marks where someone else checked those calculations and made sure the math was accurate and no mathematical mistakes had been made in the design of the locomotive. Some of the technology features, this was built towards the end of the steam era. The steam only lasted another 10, 15 years in terms of production, a little bit longer on the railroad. But so steam had been around for 100 years, and by this point, they were actually concerned with fuel economy. They were trying to get more power out of the same amount of coal and the same amount of water, or less coal and less water. This locomotive was built with a feed water pump system that preheats the water before it goes into the boiler. It saves burning the extra coal. It gets the water temperature up a little bit higher before it hits the boiler. It's better for the stresses on the boiler, and it conserves fuel. The firebox had a combustion chamber built into it, which was an area for some of the gases that would collect and burn more efficiently. Again, getting more power out of the coal. The boiler was equipped with superheaters. The superheater tubes took steam, added additional heat to it so that the energy released when it got down to the cylinders that Aaron showed us last week in the video. It had more energy when it expanded, and again, you used less raw material to make the same amount of power. There were some labor-saving devices in the cab. It had a power stoker, so that the fireman didn't need to shovel the entire time. Actually couldn't keep up. So it has a power auger that feeds coal into the firebox when we're out on the road running. It has some redundant systems. There's two different water feed systems, so that if one fails, you still have a way to get water into the boiler to keep the locomotive safe. There are three different ways of determining the water level in the boiler: two sight glasses and one water column, which was just a little drip device. You opened up three valves, and the engineer could see what level of water he had in the boiler, where the steam was coming out versus where water was dripping. We have a safety alarm device in the cab that lets us know if the water gets too low. There's a low water alarm. That if the water level gets too low, it opens up, it allows steam to escape through a very loud whistle that wakes everybody, it draws your attention to it, and you can take some actions to recover from whatever mistake had been made. So that was some of the technology that they were using back in 1941, and it resulted in a pretty efficient, for its day, steam locomotive.
All right, excellent. All right, thank you. So just so when you think about technology these days, we always usually think about computers and robotics and satellites and rockets and things like that, but the history of technology is really fascinating. So just as we learned from Dean today, this was technology from 75 years ago. Some of our other videos we've talked about, computer punch cards is another one we've shared with the audience. So we even talked about abacuses from 2,000 years ago. So if you're interested in learning more about that technology from a long time ago, there's a lot of really fascinating things to learn there. Plus, that'll give you some really good ideas. So as you're solving problems going forward into the future, it gives you a lot of good ideas to start with by learning from what all those great engineers and scientists have done before us. So all right, with that, thank you very much, Dean. We thank you for your time today.
Thanks, man.
And thanks everybody for listening.